Research coming out is starting to note that because of plastic and its added chemicals, it's entering into women's placentas when they're pregnant with a child. And the issue with that is plastic and its additive chemicals cause endocrine disruption. And the endocrine disruption is leading to different issues across the board. Whether it's early puberty is one issue. We're also seeing lower fertility rates in females. We're seeing lower fertility rates in males. We're seeing, issues with genitalia for both sexes, both males and females. And it's just all across the board, plastic is affecting our children, and they're the ones that tend to be more exposed to it. It may sound dumb, but because they're closer to the ground, like plastic is all over the ground in dust, so they're inhaling it more. They're also more tactile in their interactions with the world, so they're grabbing onto things, they're chewing on things, and the majority of things made nowadays, at least here in the United States, is from plastic.
Hello and welcome everyone to Planet vs. Plastics podcast series brought to you by the Network India. I'm your host Rumit Walia for this insightful journey into a world free from plastic pollution. Today we're going to talk about the theme itself, Planet versus Plastics. And for that we have with us Mr. Aiden Sharon, who is the Director of End Plastic Initiatives at earthday.org. And we're going to be talking about why this theme has been chosen, what are the aims. We're going to be talking around so many things that impact you with plastics on a daily life. So let's go right into it.
But before we dive in, here's a quick reminder. The views expressed here are for general informational purposes, and we encourage you to do your own research. We're here to spark ideas, inspire change, and navigate the complexities of plastic pollution.
So, welcome Aiden to the Planet versus Plastics podcast series. It's so good to see you and have you, who is basically, I would say, the man behind Plastics Initiative, Ending Plastic Initiative, let's say. So, let's talk about the very first question. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit about your work at earthday.org and why this theme is this year? Plastic, like Planet versus Plastic. Why is that?
Yeah, so my name is Aiden Sharon. I'm the Director of End Plastic Initiatives at earthday.org. I've been on the team for about 2 years now. The reason we chose this year's theme, Planet versus Plastics, is to highlight the human health effects of microplastic and its additive chemicals. So a lot of the times, the general public isn't really aware. Plastic is one, everywhere, and two, it
Yeah.
can be dangerous. And more research is coming out every single day about how it's interrupting our hormone systems. It's getting into our bloodstreams. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar that you're eating a credit card's worth of plastic every week. That could be higher
Yeah.
now. So if you just think about that in terms of size, it's kind of intimidating. It's also important to highlight the environmental effects of plastic. So plastic production covers from the extraction of fossil fuels all the way to the disposal of plastic and then its final breakdown into microplastic.
That's great. That's great. So I was also going through the website of earthday.org and I saw that it is a demand that we are doing the reduction of 60% in the produce of the plastic by 2040. So how that came into action? I mean, what is the logic behind it, or how this number came into the let's say made into this statement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we picked the 60% reduction by 2040, one, because it's, palatable. It's a lot of reduction, but we also picked it because if we just cut out single-use plastic and single-use plastic packaging, we can reduce plastic production by 50% today. So that just leaves a 10% gap that we have to cover after getting rid of these useless plastics that there's no real reason to have them. Like, you don't need to be wrapping an apple in plastic. You don't need to be wrapping an orange in
Yeah.
plastic. There's so much of our food products that are exposed to plastics that don't really need it. And
Yes.
in terms of health, we don't know what it's doing to us. Plastic is such an under researched material and just understudied material with very little regulations that in 10 years, everybody's going to be like, why are we using this? Why were we so blatantly enwrapping ourselves in plastic? Why did we let it touch our kids? Why did we let our dogs chew on toys made out of plastic? Like, it's just such a
Yeah.
understudied material. It's gonna look like the Nets lead Like we're gonna get 10 years down the road and be like, I can't believe we are using plastic more than we use lead.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's everywhere. You very rightly said. I mean, we cannot eradicate it from our lives. I mean, even the specs that we are wearing, it's made of plastic. But it really depends on how less you can consume it, and how it's very important how you produce, consume, and then dispose of.
Yeah,
Because plastic is not going anywhere, it's just shifting from one place to another. And I realized that. So in India, when we go to fruit markets, vegetable markets, the plastic has still not made it to the packaging of the, let's say, bananas and apples. I mean, oranges especially don't need
yeah,
plastic, they already have a peel outside. So I was shocked when I was in, let's say I was in Korea and Philippines. I saw why it is packed. I mean, it doesn't need that. Even if the practices of sending these things to different dustbins is there, but it is not getting recycled. Only 5% of the plastic, I believe, has been recycled so far in the world. So it's very drastic. And that reminds me of that now every country is coming forward, with India putting a ban on the single use plastic. I know still the state governments have to take it more seriously. But the plastic treaty is happening right there. I mean, it's very near to you, I guess. It'll be happening on 21 and 22nd in Ottawa in Canada. And then the final will be in Korea, I believe. So how do you feel about that? I mean, do you really see that? Have you worked on the plastic treaty? How does it look basically for our audience and viewers? Let's say.
yeah. So essentially, the Global Plastics Treaty or the UN Plastics Treaty, depending on how lawyer y you want to talk, is basically all countries coming together in a similar way that countries have come together to fight other sources of pollution. So we have the Basel Convention, the Stockholm Convention, the Montreal Protocol to kind of curb different types of pollution, including CFCs and added chemicals and
Yeah.
shipping and all those other things. And this is kind of the next step. So people are recognizing that countries are recognizing that plastic is an issue. And the only way for us to actually solve the issue is to come together as nations and solve the problem. So basically, 2022, UNEA, UN Environmental Assembly, came together and declared plastic an issue and declared that they're going to
Mm.
come together for five sets of meetings to negotiate the treaty. These negotiations are grueling. They're pretty boring. It's full of lawyers. It's full of delegations. I mean, I find them fascinating, but the majority of people don't want to go sit in a hot room all
Yeah.
day listening to us argue over, the definition of source or whatever it is.
Yes.
But the end goal of this treaty for us is to make sure there are caps on production of plastic and to make sure that voluntary measures are not taken. There needs to be a mandate. It needs to be a legally binding treaty. It needs to hold countries accountable, especially countries that are producing the majority of plastic, such as the United States. It's not the fault of countries in the global south that they have so much plastic in their environment. It's being shipped from
Yeah.
countries that have industrialized and have been just pumping this stuff out and just throwing it away constantly for years now. And the burden's falling on countries in the global south, and that's just not fair to them. It's not fair
Yeah.
to the public in the United States because most of them aren't aware of it either. So
Yeah.
INC4 is taking place in Ottawa, Canada, between technically April 23rd through the 29th. But in reality, people meet a couple days beforehand. So April 19th, delegates from different countries start to arrive. They start to host meetings in the areas. And then finally, those official meetings start the day after Earth Day.
That's great. So it also, I always wonder that I'm sure that all the corporations in the world and the governments have realized that plastic is a problem. But still, I mean, it's a long way to go. It took us so many years to change from one energy to a renewable energy, and still it's the transition phase. So I think it will take time. But the belief that all the generation, younger generation, in fact, right now have in these conventions is because of the very one of the example you mentioned, the Montreal Protocol. How, when we realize that ozone depletion is going to be a huge problem for the whole planet. I mean, we are all living in one single sphere. It's not like if something is happening in the US, it won't affect us. Maybe it will affect a little late, but it will do that. And that's what's happening with the plastic. I mean, we see this huge Pacific garbage patch, and
Yeah.
I was just seeing another picture of all the treks in Himalayas are filled with plastics, and then this sea, and then all the species. So you name it, and plastic is there. So this is tragic. But I think so. How do you see this? Like, it always comes down to the point of an alternative.
Yeah.
So when CFCs were there, so the industries, the scientists, everybody just get themselves, and they presented very nice alternatives to how we can replace it. And then it happened, and it happened so fast. So what is your take on all the alternatives like available in the market? In India, there are so many, but still that poly bag is something that people are not able to get rid of. I mean, it has become a habit, or maybe it's ease of doing things, something like
Yeah.
that. So I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the biggest issue with plastic is how convenient it really is. Like it's hard to deny how convenient plastic can be. So there has to be kind of a shift in the way that we think. And you know, innovative solutions are always great. The main issue that we see with innovative solutions to plastic or alternatives to plastic bags that are coming out is we don't want it to become plastic all over again. So we don't want to create these
Yes.
biodegradable bags, supposedly biodegradable bags that turn out to be, poisoning our forest or something. So it might
Yeah.
just be we need to start looking backwards for some instances. So that fruit example I mentioned earlier, we don't need all that packaging around fruit. So why don't we cut
Exactly.
down there? Or why don't we start thinking about going towards, paper bags that are more recyclable and maybe start using more cardboard that's also more recyclable. We also
Yeah.
see, rates of recycling for things like aluminum and steel can be recycled at a much higher rate than plastic just because of there's a formula for aluminum. That's the one we're going to follow. That's what we got to do. With plastic,
Yeah.
anybody can make any type of plastic using all sorts of different chemicals that aren't regulated, are hard to follow, and then once you get down to the disposal process, it's impossible for them to be truly recycled. So you and I could go out, buy plastic, buy all the chemicals, make our own thing, and then people would be like, "Oh, so how do we recycle?" It'd be like, "You got to figure it
Yeah.
out. Like, it's not on us. We did it." And
Yeah.
that's kind of what corporations have been doing, and production companies and petrochemical companies have been doing for years. Is saying, "Hey, we just make this stuff. It's on you, the consumer, to get rid of it. It's not our job." So what we also want to see is a little bit of responsibility from these corporations, whether that's,
Yeah.
extended producer responsibility or investments in these innovative solutions or just investments in going backwards a little bit. So just thinking of more holistic ways and more reusable ways to use plastic.
Yeah. And this mentality really have to change. I mean, it's also happening in major, like most of the parts in the world, that as soon as it gets out of your warehouse, or let's say as soon as it gets out of your door or your home, or let's say your society, it's not your problem.
Yeah.
But it's still on the planet. Even if you throw it out in the space, I was also mentioning it to one of the other podcasts that we had, it still exists in space as well. So there's no way out. You have to do that circular thing. You have to actually take care of whether it's recycling, whether you're reusing it, or whether the most important part, that how less are you consuming it. That's the best you can do. So look at what you're buying on a daily basis. Do you really need that plastic in your life? The life has become a plastic basically. Earlier we used to say that plastic surgery is something, but now it's inside us, as you mentioned. And I was reading also what you mentioned in the very beginning somewhere, that few decades ago people came up with this miracle material that we used to call plastic, which is a menace now. They used to say that paper is creating deforestation,
Yeah.
let's switch to plastic. But now we're going back to the circle, I mean ground zero. We are again going back to the paper, which is, you very correctly said, should not be a solution. So bamboo is there, and then cardboard, which can be recycled so many times, and like doing less. So Aiden, I my another question, I am so interested in this as well. I think you released, or you prepared this report on babies versus plastics, right? And I was shocked actually. I mean, I saw that, okay, I mean, humans versus plastic is there, species versus plastics. We are dealing on a daily basis with this plastic waste. But what is babies versus plastics? I mean, they don't even have a very good conscience right now. They haven't see the world, and they are already dealing with this plastic problem. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about
Yeah. And it's a terrifying name, and I'm aware of that. Babies versus
that?
plastic sounds, absolutely
But it
terrifying.
really gets the attention of the
It
people.
does, and it really is terrifying. So we're starting to see the research coming out is starting to note that because of plastic and its added chemicals, it's entering into women's placentas when they're pregnant with a child. And the issue with that is plastic and its additive chemicals cause endocrine disruption. And the endocrine disruption is leading to different issues across the board, whether it's early puberty is one issue. We're also seeing lower fertility rates in females. We're seeing lower fertility rates in males. We're seeing, issues with genitalia for both sexes and both males and females. And it's just all across the board, plastic is affecting our children, and they're the ones that tend to be more exposed to it. You know, it may sound dumb, but because they're closer to the ground, like plastic is all over the ground in dust, so they're inhaling it more. They're also more tactile in their interactions with the world, so they're grabbing onto things, they're chewing on things, and the majority of things made nowadays, at least here in the United States, is from plastic. And a lot of parents just don't realize that it's not this inert material that isn't shedding off tiny little microscopic pieces. A good example somebody brought up to me was plastic and its additive chemicals are kind of like spaghetti and meatballs. So the spaghetti is plastic, the
Oh,
meatballs is the additive chemicals. But once it starts breaking down, it's merged into this one thing. So it's just a blended up spaghetti and meatballs, and those chemicals are easily able to penetrate into your body.
uh,
And the
that's so sad. Also, like all this plastic that is doing to us and to the earth as well. It is a slow poison, basically. People are not realizing as of now because it's not actually just. I wouldn't like to put it that way, but killing them right away.
right,
But
the majority of people
yeah,
aren't choking on a plastic bag every day, but what they are doing
yeah,
is kind of inhaling small amounts of plastic throughout the years, which leads to increase in cancer rates. As another
yeah.
thing that we're starting to see, especially
That's right.
those
I wouldn't have. Yeah,
yeah, especially those people that are living on the front lines of the production facilities. And also, you have informal and formal waste pickers. So, the people that are the true backbone of our recycling industry and our trash industry are the ones most exposed to these things. And they're the ones that we're seeing this, increase in cancer rates for these pockets. And it's just it's what do we do? And the only solution is to start cutting down the production of plastic and then calling for some transparency and just coming together as countries like you mentioned earlier, the hole in the ozone's terrifying.
yeah,
Why don't people see that plastic is just as terrifying? It's just we have to have educational formats. So like what you're doing with this podcast is fantastic because it's getting the word out there that this material that's become so just ubiquitous in our lives isn't good for us, and we just need
yeah.
people to understand that.
Yeah, I also tell this story. I think I've told this in so many places. This King Midas story. When he came, he was given this wish that everything that he touches becomes gold.
Yep.
He was so happy in the beginning, but then soon he realized the food and the water and even the relatives and kids and everything is turning into gold. So it's not really gold. So that is what has been happening with the plastic as well. So that has been a wonderful conversation, Aiden, about the theme. So since we're talking about theme, last I think for last 2 years, Earth Day theme was invest in our planet, and that was very amazing how we called out to all the business, educational institute, all the stakeholders to invest their part, not just by giving the money, I mean donating money, investing their time, investing their employees, their research and everything into this. And this year we have planet versus plastic. So how do you see these themes shifting every Earth Day and then people responding to it? And how do we tell this to people that themes are keep on shifting because of the focus that we have, but Earth Day is not just one day, it's every day. So what are your thoughts about all the themes that we have had in the past?
I think the invest in the planet theme was one of our most important ones that we've done recently, especially just because it's in order for us to move to a cleaner earth and to a healthier planet, we need to have investments in certain technologies. We also need to have investment in people. Like you said, it's not just money, it's investment in time, it's investments in educating people and finding the time to teach them, like, hey, we don't need to be burning all of this, or we don't need to be using this material when there's a cleaner, more equitable solution to this problem that's actually cheaper for you too, as long as we convince, the producers and the people that are the wealthiest in the world and corporations that, like, hey, we're calling for you to stand up, or we're calling for you to start making changes, or we're not going to buy from you anymore. Like, we're not going to invest in these corporations anymore if they're just killing us openly. And I say killing us, and that's kind of brutal, and I, don't mean they're literally going
It's
out there.
literally
But
yeah.
over time, it's hurting us. I mean, the global south are the ones that are most affected by these issues, and they're the ones most taking the blunt force of these climate issues. But it's going to lead to it affecting everybody. Like, it's not just them. So we need to invest today in communities, in education, and in positive solutions.
That's wonderful. So I think with that, it's a wrap for this podcast, and it has been very informative about why planet versus plastic. Or anybody would like to say anything, it is everything versus plastic right now. You versus plastics, I versus plastics, the people versus plastic. I mean, I was fascinated when I saw it on the website that it keeps on changing. Volunteer versus plastic, unity
Yeah.
versus plastic. So it really catches the attention of people, and it also shows the multifaceted aspect and the intersection that plastic have in almost every aspect of our life, from babies to old age. It's everywhere, and you will find it literally in every feet of your path, basically, let's say. And now in microplastic in our bloods as
Yeah.
well. So thank you so much, Aiden, for doing this podcast. It was wonderful seeing you and having this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. So, for the audience, keep it clean, keep it green, and remember, every day is Earth Day.